Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out on a Saturday afternoon. It's nice and cool after the rain, so I know you feel like taking a nap, but thank you for joining us. We've decided to start a series called Red Dot Dialogues. And this series is really about having a conversation with all of you out there. And today we have Ravi, Nicholas, and myself from Red Dot United. Ravi is our Secretary General, Nick is our Organizing Secretary, and I am the Chairperson. So over time, we hope to introduce more of our team to you, and meet yourselves in person as well. So with Red Dot Dialogues, what it is we are going to have certain topics that are interesting to Singaporeans and their lives and relevant to events that go on. And we want to hear from you. We also share with you our views. In this case, our topic for today is the new cabinet that was formed after the general election of 2020. Parliament will be starting on Monday, the 24th, and so just before that, we put out a paper 2 days ago. We hope that you have had the chance to read it. If not, please do visit us on our website at red.united.sg. You will see it there. It is about 6 pages long, but if you take the time to read it, please do give us your feedback and any questions or comments that you might have. We welcome all comments, even if you disagree with us. So, shall I just get into it then?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're just going to take the time to go through parts of our paper. So myself and then Nick, and followed by Ravi, and then we'll plunge into some feedback and questions that we've received on the internet. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to type them out on Facebook. And if we can't get to them today, we will get back to you at another time. So we title our paper Buyer's Guide, PM Lee's 5th Cabinet and the Price Tag for Public Service. It's actually a pun on the word cabinet, being a piece of furniture as well as our body politic. And afraid Nick says it's not a very good pun, but well, it is what it is. So we started off by different sections on questions any savvy buyer would ask when you purchase a piece of expensive furniture. And these questions are, can you afford it? Can we afford it? Is it good quality? Will this add value to our lives? Are we getting the best deal? And is there any guarantee if we do not like it or it doesn't fit its purpose? So I'll start off with the first two sections on can we afford it and is it good quality? Now on July the 25th, after the GE, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong announced his new cabinet. It's his 5th cabinet, and within it, the ministers as well as other political appointees. We now have 41 political appointees out of the candidates that were elected in the GE. 20 of these are full ministers in the cabinet. And then following that, there are 7 senior ministers of state, 7 ministers of state, 3 parliamentary secretaries, and there are 5 mayors. It is a large government ministerial team. And so out of the 83 members of parliament, we have 41 political appointees. Now this would be the time for us to scrutinize these appointments before our 14th parliament sits. And we've done some research and applying very conservative guesstimate because we do not know at each level their remuneration. So we've just gone with the most conservative amount we've got. So we can safely say that more than $259 million of public monies will be used to support these 41 political appointees over the next 5 years. Now, given this amount, we want to expect accountability on the number and cost of these leaders in the spirit of financial prudence. Now, one of the arguments is that we need to make sure that there's not too huge a financial sacrifice on their part, And so we did a comparison of their income before being appointed, so based on the salaries that they were making in the occupations they had before joining the cabinet or being a politically appointed. And it suggests that 9 out of these 41 political appointees earned higher salaries before they accepted these appointments. So what that means is that quite a significant amount of them saw their salaries rise by a large amount, often in multiples of what they were making before. Now, this raises some questions for us, I think, because it does seem that when you compare our minister salaries to other developed nations, Singapore's ministerial salaries are rather out of the ballpark. And so we're going to discuss some of the questions that arise out of that. We also notice that there are multiple ministers in each portfolio. For example, the Prime Minister's office has 7 cabinet ministers and 1 minister of state. So that's a total of 8 political appointees from the MPs that were elected. We also would like to discuss a little bit more, or actually we'd like to know more about the mayors, the 5 mayors that we have. They will be taking home about $3.3 million each year in total, adding up to $16 million over 5 years. And so we do ask, what is the role that these 5 mayors play for our little red dot? Red Dot United would like to propose that the government publish the salaries of each political appointee annually in the interest of transparency and accountability. And we've asked this because research has actually shown that salary transparency helps to motivate people to work harder, be more productive, and collaborate better with their colleagues. So I'm going to move on. I've not given everything in detail. Please do read our paper on our website. I'm going to move on to the quality of our cabinet. Now, in 2018, our former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong was asked in a forum if ministerial salaries could be slashed and that money being awarded to a pension for the elderly. And his response was that very, very mediocre people would be ministers in the long run, because if we could not pay our ministers well, we would end up with people who could not even earn $1 million outside being ministers. So what this does is it puts a money value on quality. And I think that there was quite a lot of backlash to that. People were able to straight away see the connection that he was trying to make, and they disagreed vociferously with that. So the idea then is that if you see a man's worth by the salary that he makes, and if you use that to justify high ministerial salaries, it's maybe no wonder at all that Singapore is now one of the most expensive cities in the world, because everything has been boiled down to its money value. And to know the price of everything, but not the value of it is a pity, isn't it? So we actually found as well a response on Facebook made by the daughter of one of Singapore's founding ministers, E.W. Barker, and she pointed out that our ministers in days past did not mind taking low pay for the work that they did in nation building. And it's about the concept of public service, so we'd maybe like to discuss that as well later on. And we do acknowledge indeed that some ministers did leave higher paying jobs in order to join public service, in order to serve in a public office. But as we pointed out earlier, that's 9 out of the 41 political appointees. So, we have been told that these high salaries correspond to top quality. And we do know that the eyes of the world are on us. There are many reporters who write about our high salaries. There are many ministers overseas who question, should we follow the Singapore model? So many people are scrutinizing us. And is our cabinet resilient and long-lasting? Well, we've looked at the ages of our cabinet. 14 of the ministers are actually 55 and above, and only 2 of the full ministers are in their 40s. Lee Hsien Loong, at 68 years old, is the eldest of our ministers, and he has said that he will need Singapore to be in a good state before he hands it over. So we'll want to discuss that as well. In comparison, we've looked at some other heads of state. Around the world, we actually see a trend of younger heads of states. Austria's new head of state is 33. Finland's Sanna Marin took office in December just last year at age 34, and New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern was 37 when she was sworn in as Prime Minister in 2017. So that's actually quite interesting to see that trend. And we also see that in the Workers' Party, there was a very clear succession plan, and with the older MPs and leaders stepping down at the ages of 63, 59, and 58. So what this means is that we want to know that we are well poised for the future. And Red Dot United believes that in the true spirit of public service, quality in a government is attained by the practice of good stewardship, accountability, and transparency, which can only encourage greater efficiency and effectiveness. In the business world, strong brands attract employees who work with them for less money because they are willing to for the brand value. And this actually increases value for the customers and profits for the company. And so there's actually an attraction of the strong brand there, which actually means that you don't need to be paying very high salaries. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Nick now.
Thank you, Michelle. I'll be covering the next 2 points for the paper. Will this add value to our lives, and are we getting the best deal? After the GE 2011, when PAP lost a GRC and was given the lowest percentage of the national vote, 60% since independence, they commissioned an independent committee to review the ministerial salaries, the result of which was a pay cut of almost a third for full ministers, the PM, and the President. The new benchmark was still a median income of the top 1,000 Singapore citizens, and with a 40% discount to reflect the ethos of political service. It is often claimed by government that these high salaries for political appointees in Singapore is a key factor to deal with corruption in the country. However, the Transparency International releases a Corruption Perceptions Index, and that is the most widely used indicator for corruption worldwide. Singapore ranks behind Denmark, New Zealand, and Finland in this corruption index. The heads of these countries also earn significantly less than the head of Singapore. Is it absolutely necessary to have high salaries to guarantee no corruption in a country? We propose that ministerial salaries should be reviewed again and pegged to a multiple of median gross income of Singaporean citizens. When the pay is pegged to the top 1,000 Singaporeans, there's a greater incentive than ever to take in high earners and naturalize them to become Singaporeans. Is this the right incentives that the government should be having for attracting new citizens? Next is, are we getting the best deal? In the wake of the trade wars between America and China and COVID-19, many Singaporeans have lost their jobs and are facing financial hardships. Many businesses are folding, and it is appropriate and crucial for our leaders to demonstrate prudence in government spending. Are the same large number of political appointees the best value for Singapore at this time? We note that very few changes have been made to the ministerial portfolios. PM Lee has cited the need for continuity in time of upheaval, saying that the Times put a premium on experience. However, the flip side of the coin is that, do these old policies that led us here pave the way for a future that we want to go to? With such a large roster of ministers, Ministers of State and Parliamentary Secretaries, how many different perspectives, suggestions and policies do we actually hear from them? And given the chance, how many of these ministers actually vote against the party line when given the chance? We think that instead of large number of ministers, we should have better quality ministers. I'd like to pass time now to Ravi, and he'll cover the last 2 points of our paper.
Hi, if you're joining us for the very first time, thank you for joining us at this Red Dot Dialogues. This is our very first effort, and we decided to put this together because Parliament will be meeting for the first time on Monday, and it's very, very important that Singaporeans cast a spotlight on the Parliament, which will be sitting very, very soon, right? And if you look at the paper that we have put out, if you have not, please go and have a look at it. It's on our website. Please do give us your comments, give us your questions if you have any. And we promise that we will look at every one of them, and if necessary, we will continue adjusting our policies and positions as we go along, right? And as you have heard, my party members, our chairman, Ms. Michelle Huang, and our organizing secretary, Nicholas Tang, and it's very important for Singaporeans to ask, what are the guarantees that we have as Singaporeans? Yes, we have 41 political appointees who have been appointed, and we have not talked about the Speaker of Parliament and the Deputy Speaker of Parliament and some other political appointees in our papers. But without including them, the rough numbers that we have gotten, the best guesstimate is that in the next 5 years, Singaporean taxpayers will be spending $259 million to fund the salaries of these ministers and political appointees. So it's a very important question to ask is, what guarantees do we have that these ministers and these political appointees will do the job that they are appointed to do? We know that some ministers are entrenched in their ministries for several years. The health minister, he's been there for about a year, and some other ministers have been there for about a year. So you know that when someone is entrenched in a ministry for such a long time, there is so much of incumbency that is built into that office. So change is very often not forthcoming as we want it to be, right? So what kind of guarantees do Singaporeans have in appointing such a large cabinet? I think it's a very, very important question to ask. If you look at the health ministry, again, casting a spotlight on the health ministry, there have been so many lapses. And we are right now in the midst of a pandemic. First, we are told not to wear masks, and then wear masks if it's necessary, and then it's compulsory to wear masks, right? So where is the accountability in the health ministry? So what guarantees do Singaporeans have? I think this is where the President can play a very, very important role in providing this guarantee for Singaporeans that this $259 million that we pay to our ministers and to the political appointees, it's well spent, right? The President has got a wide custodial, ceremonial, and constitutional powers. She also has a lot of soft powers, right? And she has to swear in the cabinet and the political appointees according to the recommendations of the Prime Minister. But would she ask the Prime Minister, what is your basis for appointing these ministers? There may or may not be actual provisions in the regulations or in the law, but she can certainly ask these questions, and she should ask these questions, because the president too is funded by public monies, and the president is elected to be a representative of the people. And we would like the office of the president to be a safeguard for the monies that are spent on the behalf of the taxpayers. You know, of course, like what Nick said earlier, continuity is a very, very important thing for the Prime Minister. He has often talked about it, and every time an election comes, he would often say, well, we need to have a new generation in, we need to ensure that the PAP has got succession planning, and so on and so forth. But after continuity, I think what comes next to him is that his ministers are rotated in several different ministries. At Red Dot United, we welcome that. We think our ministers need a breadth of experience, and to get that breadth of experience, it is important for them to be rotated in different ministries and not for them to be entrenched in one particular ministry, like for example the Health Ministry or the Home Affairs Ministry or the Law Ministry or the Foreign Affairs Ministries, right? Because when you're entrenched, it means that no new ideas may be coming out from there, and we do not know what skeletons some of these officers may have in their closets, right? So a new broom always sweeps better. So we would like the ministers to be rotated into the different ministries, but this opportunity should also, a similar kind of opportunity should also be given to Singaporeans, right? Because very often we are said not train and then place yourself, but very often when we go through training, it's very difficult to find placement, which is why at RDU we have championed this idea of place and train, you know, because we can always place someone in a job or in a career, and we can train them along the way. So what's good for the goose should also be good for the gander, right? So if just as we are accepting that ministers should be able to train and gain experience by being involved in so many different ministries, Singaporeans too should have this privilege of being placed at a job and not worry so much about being displaced by foreigners, you know, and have the confidence that they will be taken care of, that they will be provided for, you know. And I think that's very, very important. And for the young graduates, you know, the government often says, you know, to take up internship. Don't worry too much about the salaries. It's important to gain exposure. I think that's good. That's a good advice. But that same advice would also apply to our ministers and to our political appointees. Don't worry so much about your salaries, you know. And that's a good principle to stand by. And I think we ended off our paper by referring to what our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said, that if we don't pay the ministers well, it would mean, or it may mean, that some of our women may have to go overseas and work as maids, you know. And we noted in our paper that although our women have not gone overseas and become maids, many of us are working as delivery drivers, and we are working as Grab drivers and have non-permanency in the kind of jobs that they hold. We don't look down on maids. We don't look down on delivery drivers. We don't look down on Grab drivers. I think they are very hard-working people, and we have spoken much about them. Our security guards, our nurses, our Grab drivers, you know, those who have non-permanency, you know. But these jobs do not add value to the people who do them, and that's what we are pointing out, you know. And so Singaporeans should feel safe and secure in the jobs that they hold, just like the ministers and the political appointees. They're set for life with a bill of $259 million. Even if they lose the next election, they're set for lives. But it's not the same for Singaporeans. So that's what we are pointing out, right? So I hope you take your time to go read through the papers and try to understand what we are saying. Give us your questions, give us your comments, and we will walk alongside with you.
Thank
Michelle,
you.
yeah.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, Nick. So the day that we put out our paper on the 20th of August, we also read with sadness that we've lost a very important pioneer in Singapore, a top civil servant whose views and opinions have been much valued over the years, even after he stepped down, and that's for Mr. Ngiam Thong Dao, and so he passed away. To pay him a tribute and to just remember him, we'd like to just reference a quote that he made in an interview with I think it was from the medical journal, with the editor of a medical journal in some years ago, 2013. Okay, the SMA. And so what he said was, in the early days, Lim Kim San and Goh Keng Swee worked day and night, and they were truly dedicated. And he said, okay, Lee Kuan Yew might disagree with him, but it started going downhill when we started to raise ministers' salaries, not even pegging them to the national salary, but aligning them with the top 10 at that time, I think.
Yeah,
and when you raise ministers' salaries to the point that they're earning millions of dollars, every minister, no matter how much he wants to turn up and tell Lee Hsien Loong off, will hesitate when he thinks of his $1 million salary. He said even if he wants to do it, his wife will stop him. And so he says that when the salary is so high, which minister dares to leave? And then he said, unless they decide to become the opposition party. And as a result, he says, the entire political arena has become a civil service, and he doesn't see anyone speaking up anymore. So what do you think? Do you think that the high ministerial salaries prevent our ministers from speaking up?
Nick, what do you think?
I think there's an element of that for sure. It is difficult to speak up when you're making so much money, when your entire existence depends on speaking to the party line instead of against it. It is, I think, even if your intention, you go into the best intentions, over the years, after making so much money, it becomes increasingly difficult to get out of that lifestyle. I think you accrue too much debt, or you accrue too much, you get used to a certain lifestyle, you refuse to get out of it. That's what I feel about it. What do you think, Robbie?
Yeah, I think you become beholden to that large amount of salaries. That's what I think. And even after you leave office, you're still beholden because you're set for life, right? So even if you see society moving in a different direction in which you don't like to see it moving, you would withhold your comments because you benefited from this policy, And I think that is why having such large ministerial salaries, it's disadvantageous to Singaporeans.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rami. So we're also going to intersperse maybe some of the comments that we've received from readers from people who wrote into us, with people who are on our Facebook Live and asking some questions. So one of the questions we have is, how do we factor in the hidden perks while keeping salaries at an acceptable manner?
Well, I think after the 2011 general election, the Prime Minister convened a Ministerial Salaries Committee, and it is and we now have a new salary structure. It's called clean wages. So many of the perks which were there before the 2011 election, they are no longer there, right? So but still there's still a lot of hiddens in that, right? Like in 2017, I think, in responding to a parliamentary question, a minister from the Prime Minister's office said that the political appointees got 4.1 months bonus, but they only declared it because there was a parliamentary question, right? And but won't we prefer if they declared it in a more permanent, periodic manner?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe like once a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And also with the question of bonuses, I think one of our readers wrote in to say, what do you think of the suggestion that there not be any variable component at all, that they just be paid a salary, you know, and that be paid the salary, do a good job, and you know, that's as clean as it gets. Because what happens is when the bonus is variable and it's pegged to things like how the GDP is growing, those are numbers that maybe decisions that are made at the government level can affect what happens down the road to GDP growth. And they might then be more encouraged to plan mega projects and bring in more workers, you know, to work on those projects. So what do you think of that suggestion?
No, I also want to ask, so now our economy is going on a downward spiral. It's not doing so well. So what kind of bonuses, if any, will they be getting, right? So these are questions that Singaporeans want to know, and they have the right to ask.
Thank you.
Nick?
Maybe it's not so much about the bonuses, but are there any repercussions for, if they receive bonuses for good times, are there any repercussions for the bad times?
Yeah.
Perhaps that's something that we should be asking as well.
Exactly.
Ministerial responsibility in other Westminster systems is a very big part of government, but in Singapore you don't really see that. I mean, I think certainly the ministers do understand the concept of ministerial responsibility. I think our retired minister, Khaw Boon Wan, alluded to this when he talked about the Japanese CEOs committing harakiri in the supposed good old days.
But it doesn't apply to their own ministers, right?
So they do understand the concept of ministerial responsibility, but somehow they don't seem to practice it in the.
Because I noticed that whenever there are lapses in certain ministries, it's always the officers who are down the food chain who get axed, you know. And didn't the health ministers once say that he didn't want to breed a certain kind of culture? What kind of culture was that?
I'm not. Well, I think the latest case of this is perhaps Josephine Teo, when she talks about the dormitory workers in Singapore, and then she says she hasn't had. I think none of them had asked her for
an apology.
So it actually shows she's not even willing to give an apology, right? Yeah, and clearly there were things that could have been done better there. So
notwithstanding that, I don't think she talks to many dormitory workers as well.
How many has she talked to? Yeah, that asked for us for.
Yeah, so I think this kind of responsibility is what's missing. I don't mind if they receive bonuses when they're doing a good job, but on the flip side, they need to take responsibility when times are bad as well.
Yes. And I think in the private sector, which is why they were pegging to the private sector in the first place, I mean, we know that the CEOs are. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Hits roll. You know, they're on very tight watch.
Yes.
You know, if they do not perform, out they go, and it just takes a couple of years, really. Yeah. And that reward is also for the risk taken, right? For the risk taken. So you see here that the benefits are there, but the risks are not, which then sort of shows a very unequal situation.
I am all for taking risk, because I think Singapore is a tiny country, and we have always thrived because we have taken risk, you know, and I think we should take good calculated risk. But at the same time, if untoward things happen because you took the wrong kind of risk, I think heads should roll. That's what I believe. Especially when you pay them, when you have a bill of $259 million, and that's very conservatively speaking, right? Heads should roll. Yes. I think so.
Well, I mean, I think that we don't seem to take many risks,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and so then I'm just saying that in the business world, entrepreneurs, for example, they survive on very little money until the business works,
Right.
and then when it does work, it's
Yes.
also a reward for all that time that they
Right.
put in and the risk that they've taken
Yes.
that it might not work at all.
Right.
But you know, in the public sector, especially as a Singapore minister, when
Yes.
you think about it. Lee Hsien Loong has been our Prime Minister now for 16 years.
I know, right? Since
So,
2004.
yeah, that's a very long
My gosh,
time.
that's
I
a very
mean,
long time.
The second most highly paid world leader is actually Hong Kong's chief executive, and
Very
they have a
long.
limit to the term that they can serve, and that's 10 years.
Right.
And so we have no limits. We have no downside, and so it's really upside all the way, it seems.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know of any global benchmark for ministerial salaries? This is from one of our Facebook readers. I mean, okay, we have to say we may not know sometimes the information, but we can go research and look it up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all part of the dialogue.
I
but-
don't think there
Yeah.
are any benchmarks as such, but I mean, all of you can do a Google search.
I mean, yeah,
it's so transparent that the average salary is about between $200,000 and $400,000. I think so. We are way off the charts.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There's actually an interesting article by the News Lens, and it's called "The Crazy Rich Salaries of Singapore's Ministers versus the Poor Peasants Who Support Them." And they've actually done a lot of charts in this article. This article's actually I printed it out just now, and I was shocked to find out it's 38 pages long. And so they've got charts. They've got all kinds of charts on the salary versus the cost of living, versus how much the citizens, the minimum wage salary versus income tax and GDP per capita, and they've plotted out all the different countries. And in quite a lot of the charts, you'll find Singapore is an outlier, right there. Okay, far away from all other countries.
Yes.
So I think you can refer to that article if you really want to see how Singapore stacks up globally. Okay, so I'm going to now read a comment from someone who emailed us, I think, right? He says that he wants to give a balanced perspective. He says he agrees with a lot of what we have to say. And actually, speaking of outliers, he says that the current framework of using the median income of the top 1,000 Singapore citizen earners seems flawed. There's a difference between having a high enough salary not to discourage people from serving and having an unsound benchmark. So speaking of global benchmarks and our benchmark, the top 1,000, he says, represents not the top 1% or even 0.5% or even 0.05%.
Right, yeah.
The top 1,000 is actually the top 0.02%. And
0.02%.
That's
Let
right.
that sink in.
And in statistics, we know that outliers can really distort the numbers.
Right.
And data points usually on either of the extreme ends are cut out to see a more accurate representation of the situation. So when you construct a benchmark, he's saying, it actually makes sense to remove the outliers, such as the top 1,000 earners. But instead, in Singapore, we are completely basing our benchmark on these outliers.
Right.
Yeah.
How odd.
So he says that so any symbolic discount for the ethos of public service is actually disingenuous because it doesn't lead to the right outcomes of taking a pay cut and personal sacrifice in order to serve. So he feels that is rigorous oversight and true sacrifice missing in Singapore's political realm? I mean, he thinks it does. What are your thoughts? Rigorous oversight and true sacrifice.
Well, I think every leader needs to sacrifice something for his people. I'm sure it is not easy to be in public office. I don't want to suggest that that our ministers and our political appointees have not made any sacrifices at all. But sometimes the sacrifice they make is negated by the huge and disproportionate amount of salary that they receive. So that's something that I want to point out, and that's something that we should all take note of.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Nick, let me ask you this question from one of our Facebook Live readers. Who can be sure that the opposition people, if they do get elected with lower pay, will not get corrupt? How can we be sure that, whoever's elected, even if the pay were lower, would not get corrupt?
Well, I think it can be seen from other countries that high pay is not necessarily a guarantee of no corruption. In fact, the 3 countries that surpass us on the corruption index, Denmark, Finland, and New Zealand, the pay of their ministers are significantly lower than that of Singapore, our Singapore ministers. So high pay is not necessarily a guarantor of corruption. So when we are talking about corruption, I think it comes to the core of a person's character rather than how much pay they are getting. And civil service requires the most important part about civil service and is the willingness to serve and the willingness to step up. It's not about you should not enter civil service or you should not enter politics for the wrong reasons, I think. As to whether or not you can guarantee that there is no corruption for any opposition members, I cannot personally give this guarantee for all opposition members. I can't speak for everyone, but I think it is for the electorate to decide if they can trust the character of the people who are entering office, and that is a check and balance. Is a educated and well-informed electorate who elect these people in the office, and that's our guard against corruption.
Right.
Yes, and I also think that you need to have these institutions, right, in place that will check and balance any politician in power, so that when they are there, whoever comes in the future, that there will be a system in place that will prevent corruption and that will have strict oversight on the ministers. So I think one of our readers brought up that in Canada, the ministers actually, when they take office, place all their assets and finances, the management of finances, in trust, so in a blind trust, so that to avoid conflict of interest. So, what are your thoughts on conflicts of interest?
There are lots of conflicts of interest. Of course. I mean, all Singaporeans knows that there are lots and lots of conflicts of interest in Singapore, with the spouses of ministers holding high offices in private institutions, private corporations. There are lots of, or even public institutions for that matter. There are lots of conflicts of interest in Singapore, right? And so, which is why at RDU, right, we believe that we should have strong institutions, not weak institutions, right? Because what the PAP wants us to have is to give them their trust in the system of a few good men and a few good women, that they will take care of us. But we know, right, that men are corruptible, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is why strong institution, the institution of the president, the institution of the judiciary, they need to be strengthened. They need to be, they are independent, but they need to be more independent, That's
right.
And that's what I feel.
That's right. And you mentioned earlier about the president. So one of the president's roles, I think one of our readers wasn't sure if that was a presidential role, but it is one of the roles of the president. Am I right? To scrutinize the appointments, or
it is the role of the president to scrutinize the appointment of. I'm not sure if it's of the ministers. It is a role to scrutinize the public appointments, the civil servants, So, but sometimes you also don't want to talk about the office that you have, but you also are talking about the office you think that you should have, right? So that's how the powers of the president can be enhanced if you really want true checks and balances in the system.
Right,
you know?
right.
So, even if it's not in the system right now, even if it's not in our policies right now, the president wields a lot of soft power. You know, so when the prime minister comes to her and says that these are all the ministers and the political appointees that I want to put in place, you know, wouldn't you ask, you know, what's your basis of putting these ministers together? You know, why do you need 41 political appointees? You know, how is it in the interest of Singaporeans? So I think these are important questions that the president should ask, but will she ask that questions? No? That's a very important, that's a very important
question.
Yeah. Will she ask the question?
Actually, just to add on, Ravi, I think on the point of conflicts of interest, I think there's an old adage that says justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. And that is one of the most important things, I think, in Singapore. I'm not saying that there's that people in positions of conflict will definitely abuse their positions of power.
Of course. Yeah.
But the problem being is that just by being in positions of conflict, there's this potential. I think in more and more in recent years, there's for example, the appointment of Ms. Goh Soon Ho, who is the wife of Senior Minister of State, Mr. Heng Chee Hao, and Lee Hsien Loong, who was the personal lawyer to PM Lee, who was appointed as the Attorney General. These people have been appointed into positions of power. Ms. Goh Soon Ho, the Auditor General, and Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, the Attorney General of Singapore. Now, not to say that these positions of conflict are bad or that they will abuse their positions of power, but the mere fact that they are put in these positions of conflict, I think there's a presumption of kind of certain unfairness, or there's a presumption of certain, rebuttable by evidence. I'm not saying that they are corrupt or anything. This is, and I do think that Singapore has many other talented people that could have been put in these positions as well. I think
the question to ask is, why were they chosen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there needs to be more transparency and accountability. That's what you're driving at.
The selection process needs to be more transparent and more accountable. That's for sure. But I mean, as we look at Singapore's selection processes, it's kind of telling. For example, like when they do global talent searches for the CEO of SMRT.
Yes.
And lo and behold, the best candidate was actually
the one and the original one that they wanted.
All along.
And how much did they spend for that talent search? Do you know?
I'm not sure. But they found 20 candidates. But the best guy they found was someone who was incubated in the SAF for like the past 30 years.
Right.
Yeah. So the question of finding the right people for the right jobs, and I don't think Singapore lacks any talent. And I do think it's important that we must find people who are neutral to any political party or any political positions. Because this, as I said, justice must be seen to be done, not just done, because it is important for country to project an image of incorruptibility.
Yes,
I think that's important.
Yes. I mean, I have great respect for our armed forces, for our police force, and our civil service and all that, right? But I also think that talent lies beyond these public institutions. You know, there are lots of talent in the private sector, and we should reach out to these talents in the private sector to come and serve the people in public offices. You know?
And the whole point of these high salaries being to attract these people in the private sector. And I'm not sure that this actually is working out so well, because our ministers are mostly from the public service or to organizations that are linked to government, if I'm not wrong. There are very few people who are actually from the actual private sector.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our own research shows that only 9 out of that 41 political appointees were drawing salaries which were higher when they were in the public sector. When they were before they were appointed. Right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, like, you know, having read through the Code of Conduct for Ministers, it actually states that a minister should avoid, as Nick said, not just actual conflict of interest, but even apparent conflict of interest, and between his office and his private financial interests. So it even states that he has to ensure his spouse, children, and other dependents do not accept gifts that place the minister under an obligation in conflict with his public duty. So I mean, the public duty of a minister is to scrutinize, and to be in charge of things in the care of their ministry. And so to ensure that they do not accept gifts, but then, what do you think, if it's not couched as a gift, if it's a salary from another organization that is under their care, that may also lead to some questions, or at least the appearance of a difficulty when it comes to conflict of interest. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's very high standards. Right. And so in order to adhere to these high standards, we really need to see more transparency, accountability, and independence.
Right. Yeah.
So and that will take care of whoever is in power.
Right.
Because these will be high standards to which everyone will be held.
Yeah, but let's be very clear, right? We are not saying that anyone holding any of these officers, they have misused their position in some way, or they are corrupt in one way or another. That's not what we are saying at all. What we are advocating for is transparency and accountability in how these ministers and their spouses and their relatives are appointed into these places of high influence. Yeah. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So maybe back to more local issues. There's a question about the mayors and CDCs so here we go. I think it's perfectly valid to question why we need 7 cabinet ministers and 1 Minister of State to be in the Prime Minister's office when the office of the Prime Minister in the UK is not staffed by a single equivalent to a Minister or Minister of State. So I guess that's a point he's making. And then he says that, how about the mayors? Can we question the very necessity of these appointments? He's actually looked at the People's Association Act, and he doesn't find anywhere in the People's Association Act that it says there must be this position called mayor. The statute merely says that the board of the People's Association, chaired by the Prime Minister, may designate a chairman of a Community Development Council, CDC, for a district as mayor of that district. So what the statutes call for is the appointment of a chairman and members of each Community Development Council. But nowhere does it say that this chairman has to be a member of the cabinet or even a sitting MP. So this is something that may be a decision made by who, whether PA or the government. I guess we do want to know as well, but we wouldn't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of vagueness as to what the role of the mayor is. I think we are not the only one who have brought this up. If you just look at the social media, a lot of people are asking similar kind of questions. Yes. What's the role of the mayor?
That's right. Does the mayor even deal with municipal governance and management? It doesn't seem like it, right?
It just seems that the mayor is there to encourage the grassroots volunteers. So she's the chief, and seems that he or she are the chief encouragers of the grassroots effort. But do you pay $660,000 to a chief encourager? It's funny, right? That I'm a cheerleader and I'm paid $660,000. Wow, I would like a job like that.
Yes. And also, why is the designation and selection of the council chairs limited to the sitting MPs, right? You know, so that's also something that...
I mean, the same could be said about the Speaker of Parliament. I think our Constitution does not specify that the Speaker of Parliament needs to be an elected MP. We could, the fact that our Parliament is filled with MPs from the PAP, 83 MPs from the PAP, and 10 from the opposition, well, including the PSP, we now have 12 MPs from the opposition. I think it makes sense to bring in a more neutral, that's my personal opinion. We haven't talked about it in RDU, right? But I think it makes a lot of sense to bring in a more neutral person who will not always be judging on the side of the PAP or perceive more advantage to the PAP when the Parliament sits, but be more neutral towards both sides of the aisle. That's what I feel.
Well, there was also a question about the whip, the government whip.
Right.
I mean, the PAP whip, sorry. So the PAP whip, with which they mentioned who was appointed the other day, is what is their job? it seems it is to make sure that all the MPs will then vote in accordance with the party line, right?
Right.
So if that's the case, then you only get one point of view, one vote, you know. So, you know, what is there a possibility that the PAP whip would be lifted more often?
I think the government, what the PAP does is it does not restrict you from airing your point of view in Parliament. But when it comes to the time of voting on a particular position or a particular bill, then the whip is applied in instances. So the debate reflects the diversity of views. There is no difference in the outcome of the bill. It will definitely get passed because the whip is applied.
I think to be fair, on very important issues, the whip has been lifted. I'm not sure how many times. I think it's probably I wouldn't say a number because I'm not sure. But I do think that the whip has been lifted on important issues in the past. The question is whether the PAP MPs vote against their interests in the whip.
Even when the whip is lifted, right?
So the whip has been lifted 5 times in the past. As to whether the PAP MPs will vote against their interests and against the party interests, that's a different question. And also a question of if you're a PAP MP, you are already of a certain mode, I guess. You come from a certain mode and you have a certain background. So you will tend to vote with the party and you have the same beliefs as the party. Is the reason why you're in the party in the first place.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the whip is an issue. In fact, I'm also in favor of removing the whip completely, a position of whip completely from Singapore politics. But I don't think that is what's stopping the PAP MPs from voting otherwise. That's not really, I don't think that's the issue.
Yeah, true. They've got their salaries.
I think lifting the whip is, I think, Nick's personal position. It's not this is the first time I'm hearing about it.
That's my personal
He didn't say the lifting, he said the removal of the whip.
removal of the whip.
Yeah. We can look at it, we can research it. Yeah, we should research how many times it's lifted, how they vote. As Nick said, right, when it is lifted, what happens, you know, in other democracies.
My personal view is that
whips.
whips play a part if there is, if the parliament is more balanced.
Yeah.
You know, the parliament as it is now is not balanced at all. So I don't see the need for the whip.
Okay, so we have a question from Mr. Sim. Under the current salary framework, the monthly salary of the President is set equal to the reference monthly salary of the Prime Minister. So it's based off of that. Most other ministers have KPIs which they are responsible for as members of the executive branch. What does RDU think about the President's pay being completely based off the PM's salary? Is this fair, since she should not be able to take credit and enjoy the fruits of the Cabinet's efforts or be unfairly penalised if the Cabinet was incompetent? Should the President have his or her own KPI instead? What do you think?
Well, I think, this is my personal opinion, the Prime Minister don't need to draw $2.2 million every year. So to peg the President's salary to the Prime Minister's $2.2 million is unnecessary. It's not just unnecessary, I think it's wasteful of taxpayers' money. That's my personal opinion.
I think there was also a question about the President's, should he have his or her own KPI instead? I think that, well, one thing we talked about was the role is really sort of in the ministerial appointments and the civil service appointments. And so we actually made the assumption that since this is her role, that the guidance of the Prime Minister apparently, but we made the assumption that the Prime Minister would have reported to her and given his justification, the appointments of these people in important positions. And so we just asked actually, because we assumed this report was available, for this report to be made known and for it to be accessible to the public.
Yeah, I think what would be really useful is if the President published a report card every year, you know, and speak to the people directly. You know, these are the positions of authority you have elected me to. She is elected.
Yes.
Of course, we didn't have an election for President Halima. That's another matter altogether. But she is an elected president. she owes a responsibility
Yeah.
to the people.
Yeah.
She has important custodial, constitutional, and customary responsibilities. So, at the end of every year, I think she should present a report card to Singaporeans. These are the things that I have done. These are the things that I have ensured that Singaporeans' well-being is taken care of. That's what I feel. That should be the KPI.
Yeah, I think that, the president is an important role to play in our entire system of checks and balances, and we would just like to know that role is being handled and really sort of actively managed and reported the progress to
Yes.
the people.
Yes.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
okay, I think that, so thank you very much. I think that we've had a really interesting discussion. I think, it's a tip of an iceberg, really. There's so many discussions. There's so many more points that can be debated. It's something that's not an easy topic. It's something that every time we bring it up, there are people who say, no, but I don't think that this is the important part of it, I think let's look at the other part of it. So because of COVID times, we're not allowed to have a big group discussion and meet with all of you in person. And we're doing this sort of online on Facebook. But it's really the beginning of a journey, right?
Yeah.
We want to have many more of these dialogues and
Yeah.
discussions. We ourselves may not know everything about one topic, but we want to hear from you. Even the position papers that we've put out, we are going to recalibrate that.
Yes.
And after you've given us more points.
Everything can
Yeah.
be recalibrated. Everything should be recalibrated
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
nothing should be cast in stone, right? That's how policies are. That's how
right.
positions are.
Yeah.
So do give us. I would ask Singaporeans to give us their feedback. What we are working for is to ensure that the Singaporean core benefits from everything that the government does, right? We want to hold the government accountable as much as we can. We are a small little party.
On a small little red dot.
A small little red dot. But as much as we can, as much as our efforts would allow, we want to hold the government accountable in whatever areas. Just yesterday, right? It was reported that, I think Ravi Menon of Monetary Authority
That's
of
right.
Singapore, he
That's
said
right.
that
57%.
in the financial sectors, there were only 43% of Singaporeans who are
Senior managing positions.
and
in the financial sector.
Yeah, in the financial sector, and he says that
of
it's
foreigners.
reflective of the international role that Singapore's financial hub plays. And what is the importance of the international hub, Singapore being, has got to do with not having enough Singaporeans in the financial sector?
Yeah,
And it's not a new problem, Dharman spoke about it in 2012, which is 8 years ago, and he said that we need to have stronger Singaporean core in the financial sector.
Yeah.
And from 2012 now 2020,
Yeah.
nothing happened.
Yep.
Why nothing happened? I think there's a reason why nothing happened, because 2012 was a time after the 2011 election,
Yeah.
and 2011 election, the people spoke with their votes
Yeah.
that they're unhappy with the direction that the government has taken, and so in 2012, Mr. Dharman came out and said that we should look at the Singaporean core in the financial sector. But in between 2012 and 2020, something happened.
2015.
2015! Yeah, they got an overwhelming
Yeah.
majority and they forgot all about it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And now, again, Singaporeans have spoken through their votes, and now the MAS chief has spoken that we're going to have a look at it. See, that's the power of the
That's
vote,
right. Power of the vote, and thank you about that for
Yeah.
that, Ravi, because we just want to let you know that our next upcoming dialogue will be on free and fair elections, on whether they are free and fair in Singapore. So do stay tuned for that, and there will be other interesting topics. So if it's something you'd like to hear about or know our stand on, please do write into us and let us know. You can find us on our website at www.red.united.sg. So please check us out there. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we look forward to getting to know you again. See you next time.
Bye. So I think it went well. Yeah.